Welcome to Beyond the Black Letter Law by Prism Chambers, a platform where we demystify legal concepts for you. I first met today's guest when he was an aspiring barrister. Even back then, I could tell that he had exceptional flair and vision, qualities which I think are essential to be a good in-house lawyer. He's now General Counsel of one of the largest hotel groups in Mauritius, the Beachcomber Group. He has also been recently appointed as Chief People Officer. I'm delighted to sit down today to hear more about his experience as GC, particularly in the context of the pandemic. Today, I sit down with Sebastian Lahausse de la Louvière. A very warm welcome to you, Sebastian. Thank you for coming to speak with us today.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for inviting me.
Pleasure. So, Sebastian, since you were called to the bar, correct me if I'm wrong, you've gone straight into an in-house role. Have you always wanted to be an in-house lawyer?
I think it's an interesting question. While I was studying, the answer is no. I always thought that I would be someone who would have my robe, and that's what I was studying for. But when I returned to Mauritius and I did my pupillage, especially on the litigation side, it didn't give me the kick I expected it to. And I did the next segment of my pupillage with Thierry Koenig, De Comamo Koenig back at that time, which is ENS Africa today. And I really enjoyed the transactional side, the corporate side. During the course of my pupillage, haphazardly, I got an offer of employment at GML, today IBL, to join the legal department. At that point in time, you only had one person in the legal department, and so I accepted the position, and they waited for me for about 6 months, and then I went into the in-house role, and I never looked back.
Until the rest is history.
The rest is history, yeah, rest is history.
Do you ever wish that, I wish I'd spent some time in a transactional law firm, being in pure private practice, or do you feel that you found your home as an in-house lawyer?
Again, it's an interesting question, because I think my life cycle as a lawyer is very, very different to what you would ordinarily see. The answer to the question simply is no. I don't regret, because working with many law firms and outside counsel, I know exactly what is expected from them and what they do. And being on the other side of the fence, it doesn't interest me to be working within a transactional firm or going to court. Being in-house, I work mainly with transaction firms, but the thing is that it's from my perspective, it's far too restricted in terms of the work. So you get an assignment and you work on that assignment. Depending on the complexity of it, it gains more interest. But apart from that, it's pretty much an assignment, it's boxed. Whereas from my perspective, I not only see that, but I see the full spectrum of how that transaction or contract falls within a particular context. And it's up to me to manage those other complexities to ensure that that transaction or contract comes to fruition down the line. That's my responsibility. So I find that whole component far more exciting and far more fulfilling. It's my perspective.
Yes, I do agree with you, and you've talked about seeing the full spectrum of the transaction. How important do you think, being an in-house lawyer, how important do you think commercial awareness and understanding the business is?
It's absolutely essential. I think that understanding the business is one component of it, and then being able to assume that responsibility and actually be a partner to the business. That's the extra role. Understanding it is one point, but making sure that you can develop that trust with the various business units, the various leaders, so that they feel comfortable coming to you with delicate issues, because that is where the in-house counsel is at their best, in the darkest hours, in the most difficult spaces, where no one wants to go. That's where you have to go as an in-house counsel, you see.
Do you find that challenging?
I find it challenging but very, very fulfilling. I mean, I've been fortunate enough throughout my career to have always been thrown in the deep end, again, most recently. So I'm familiar with going to places and being exposed to files and situations which are very complex. And over time, you learn how to manage that as best as you can. And the funny thing about it is that often it has nothing to do with the legal side of it. It's everything to do with attitude, with your human capabilities of how do you address a particular issue or complexity.
And how do you feel about, you mentioned the word being in a little box in a sense when you're in private practice. So you do tend, I think, when you're in private practice to specialize. So for example, at Prism Chambers, we specialize in tax law. As an in-house lawyer, I would have thought you're expected to know a little bit of everything. How do you lean into that?
Yeah, well, we are generalists. I mean, the name says it all, General Counsel. So we're expected to know a bit of everything and be the legal touch point in the enterprise when it comes to every single legal matter. It's funny, at a company like Beachcomber, you see a variety of things of what I've not come across in my career, because not only is it a big group, it's also a very old group operating since this year for 70 years. So you've got a whole history behind, and you tend to deal with very, very simple matters. For instance, contracts of the babysitters of clients, from the very simple to very, very, very complex. For instance, we've been dealing with the MIC most recently. It's a very, very complex transaction. So it's the full spectrum, and you're expected to be able to handle not only what I mentioned in the beginning and not only what I mentioned in the end, but everything in between. And obviously we are a labor-intensive company, because where's the value added is the employee serving the client, and making sure that our customers are happy. That means that we are a labor-intensive company. So a lot of that work, a lot of the in-betweens is employment law.
Do you find sometimes your role is difficult, and we're going to get into your new role later, in terms of what the law says and what the business wants to do? Are there clashes sometimes?
There are, very often, but I think that if you know how to present the situation and you know how to accommodate the difficulty of the business vis-a-vis what the law says, that's where you can advise and create value. If the law says something specific and the business would like to do something which isn't very much in line, perhaps you can propose a solution which redirects that unit towards what the law says. But the golden rule is that General Counsel, any in-house counsel, should never accept to go against the law. This is obviously the fundamental tenet of what we do, because we are lawyers first and foremost.
Of course.
It's all a question about how you deal with that reality and how you present it and how you manage it. That's where you generate value towards the business.
And I guess also, and I've asked that to my other guests as well, the value, perhaps even more so than in private practice, the value of nourishing relationships with the business. How have you gone about, you've been at Beachcomber for a few years now, how have you gone about building these relationships?
At Beachcomber we have a head office in Köpip, and then we own and operate eight hotels. In Mauritius we also have tour operators abroad, and we own a property in Seychelles which we've leased to Club Med. But that's not, it's just a simple lease agreement. We're not operating there. So it is a massive group, and to your point of establishing these relationships, it's somewhat complex at Beachcomber, because when I arrived at the company 3 years ago, there wasn't any legal department. That's why I took the challenge, because I knew what it was to operate within a legal department at GML, then IBL following the amalgamation. Then I took up a head of legal role at Omnicane, as was a new challenge of starting something from scratch. So the added benefit is that people need you. Everyone wants to discuss with the lawyer, see if what they're doing is right, review practices. So it was all about going around, having lunch or breakfast with each general manager, meeting the team. It takes time. It can take up to a month to do that at Beachcomber, because to go around, you need to drive to the north and or wherever to the south. It takes time in between doing your work. But once those relationships have been established, it's just all downhill from there. And once that trust is established, people will say, it's a feeling, they'll feel comfortable calling you basically for anything, sometimes even for personal matters. They say, what do you think about this? Or I'd like to buy a boat, or, how can we go about it? It's a trust that's there. You see, if they're capable to come to you with personal matters, it's pretty much seamless from a professional perspective.
And you mentioned before about more complex transactions, such as, for example, MIC transactions and others. How do you decide when, the role stops at the GC role and you need external support, external counsel? How do you decide that? And what do you look for in a good external counsel?
Okay, so with respect to deciding at what point it is to revert to outside counsel, it would be a resource-based or competence-based decision, and often both coincide. When we need competence on a file, it's usually because it's complex, and therefore you need to put resources on that to ensure that it's addressed correctly as per the needs of the business. That would be the first answer, and if I see in-house that I can't manage that, I will report to management and say, look, I think that we need to go to such and such lawyer who is specialized in construction, M&A or whatnot, and we take a decision from there and we brief the lawyer. Can you just remind me of your second question?
What do you look for in a good external counsel?
So what we look for is trust, understanding, and above all, focus and availability. When I mean focus, I use it interchangeably, because I'm not going to retain the services of an outside counsel on a complex M&A transaction if it is a lawyer, he or she is someone who pleads in court and advises. No, I've experienced that before, and oftentimes the litigation component takes up all the time, and the person gets back to you at 6 o'clock at night, but I've got to go back to my family, and I've worked all day. So I need the outside counsel to be at the moment, responsive. Even if they can't now, in a few hours we can do a Teams call and review. So focus is key. With respect to litigation, it's the same thing. Focus is key as well as availability, and it's just the same thing. It's just a different type of lawyer that's handling the matter.
So I want to talk about your new role as Chief People Officer.
Sure.
What is a Chief People Officer?
Good question. So Chief People Officer is essentially the refreshed version of a Chief Human Resources Officer, and I pushed for that title internally because I wanted to make the shift from human resources to people. Although human resources is very clear in its objective, you've got obviously the word human in there as well, but the word people generates far more proximity. And me being in the head office and working with the operations, I felt it was important to create that bridge. For me, it's the commencement of a journey, the commencement of building a closer bridge to our teams, and especially those, the workforce at the bottom, being able to reach out to them and have their opinions on what's going well, what's going less well, what they're happy with and what they're not happy with, and to be able to adjust that and be responsive as management.
How many employees are in the group?
Ballpark, near 4,000 employees right now. Exact number, we at 3,945, around there.
And how do you see the two roles complementing or perhaps even sometimes contradicting each other, General Counsel hat and the CPO hat?
For the moment, I'm in the role since about a month and a half, but I've been assisting the human resources team very, very closely over the last 3 years. Over the last 2 years, I've been single-handedly managing the relationship of the trade unions, because we are obviously very unionized company. And when you deal with the unions, you deal with the nuts and bolts of the operations. And the union is the vehicle through which they air their grievances. So it gives you a window into the granular issues of human resource management. So I've already been exposed to it for some time. Now, how they coalesce, which they do, is on that front, on the union side, the trade union side, as well as the employment law side. As I mentioned earlier, we are a labor-intensive company. So I'd say easily 50% of my work turns around dealing with provisions of the Employment Relations Act and then the Workers' Rights Act and everything that goes with it, together with collective agreements and all that. So that's where they join. I wouldn't say that there's any contradiction between the two, because depending on what brief you receive internally, it's clear whether it's a purely legal matter or a human resource matter. That being said, I'd like to say something that I found very interesting in the GC role is that what makes the strength of a GC is to have a strategic perspective in what they do, and that is being able to understand how a decision now can make an impact, good or bad, going forward. And that requires the GC to have an appreciation of how that decision would impact various departments. And a major department in Beachcomber is was the human resource department, today people and culture, which I've renamed and refreshed. So you're always thinking, even in the legal role, how is this going to impact the relationship with the union? We've got negotiations which are ongoing. You always need to think ahead. It's like chess, you always need to think ahead. So they combine very well, and I wouldn't say that at any point in time I've experienced any conflict between the two. Having said that, I'm still new in the role. It may come along. Yeah.
Talking about conflict, your group is in an industry that has been one of the hardest, if not the hardest, hit by the pandemic. How do you navigate through that? How did you navigate through that? What were the challenges?
It was probably the most formidable experience of my entire career, because I could experience what it's like to see, the management team having to navigate total darkness. We were in lockdown. We didn't understand much. Didn't understand where the situation was headed, and having worked very closely with the CEO, it was a very fulfilling and memorable experience to have navigated that with him. Definitely, there's so much to say on it. I mean, I don't even know where to start on it. But what I can say is that I took the decision as a lawyer, as an in-house counsel back then, in that role on its own, to make sure that I was loyal to the company. I really appreciate my colleagues. I'm extremely committed to the group, and despite any opportunities that did come along, I made sure that I would stay the course, because not only for myself but for the group, but even from a personal perspective, to say to myself that on my CV I will be able to say that I withstood the test of time of a pandemic, and
you made a commitment.
And I didn't run away from the challenge, because challenges there were innumerable challenges, even from a professional perspective.
Did you have to let go of people?
Yes, we had to voluntarily. We engaged in voluntary packages, which many people took. We didn't, on the second retirement, voluntary retirement package, we didn't expect so many people to take it, but they did. That helped with cost containment. And then again, as a in-house counsel, you're very much at the center of a decision like that, because you need to ensure that what you're putting forward makes legal sense. You need to understand the repercussions of that on the union, and you need to understand the repercussions of that on government, because we are the biggest group in Mauritius, and they will come knocking at our door, to say what's going on. Which they did, but they came to do the investigation and all that, and everything was plain sailing, above board, exactly. So no, it was a formidable exposure, and one that I'm happy to have gone through, and I'm glad to say that I've known a period where the hotels, working within the hotels, were completely empty. Today they're bustling yes. With people.
Which is really fantastic. I mean, we were talking before starting shooting, and I was just saying that trying to make some plans for Easter, and all the hotels are fully booked, and I'm happy to see that, because I remember a time when we were going out the weekends when we were COVID safe, and it was so sad to see the hotels practically empty. What would you say now that we are in recovery mode? What are the challenges of the hotel industry looking ahead?
The challenges, from my perspective, are most certainly the people and culture side of it, which would go hand in hand with business, because we are looking at the sector and we're trying to understand why is the sector less attractive especially to youngsters. And we're having to look carefully at ourselves in the mirror and understand, how can we address that? How can we tweak certain fundamentals, certain infrastructural issues within the sector? And I'm saying it's within the sector, it's not only at Beachcomber, within the sector, to ensure that not only we are more attractive as an employer and as an industry, because it's an industry-wide question as to what's going on in the industry. Why are people leaving? Why can't we engage? Why can't we retain? So that is a fundamental question, a question which last week I was at a job fair, and I spoke to many of my counterparts in the industry, and everyone said to me the same thing. We're looking at how we can reinvent, the hospitality sector. And you're reinventing it. Why? You're not necessarily reinventing it for the client, because the client's coming, the client's here. You're reinventing it for the employee experience, to ensure that you can drive engagement and retention. The problem is that engagement and retention are results. A result doesn't happen on its own. You need to understand how and why. First, how we can put that. How we can generate that result. And when you're dealing with people, it's difficult. You're dealing with expectations, you're dealing with difficulties, you're dealing with emotions, and that's where it's the real challenge, but one that I'm extremely excited about. My team and I, we're looking forward to leaving our mark and making sure that we can establish a new base for the company and work towards a clear employee experience for those coming in, but especially more importantly, those of our colleagues who are with us right now, to ensure that they are happy, engaged, particularly those at the lower end of the scale, those are the employees who are in contact with the client. And that's where the value is generated, when you have innovation at that level, and when the client is made happy by an employee. Everything goes through the employee. So if we manage to shift that paradigm, I think that great days are before Beachcomber and before the industry.
And you spoke about innovation, so I want to ask a question that's slightly related to that. Do you think in your new role as CPO, or even in your role as GC, do you think technology can help us?
Yes, technology is fundamental. It's of paramount importance because why? It's because when we wish to implement something new, I think that what we want to implement needs to be measured. And if we are going to engage in innovative ideas, we're going to want to measure that and understand its impact. And you can only measure that via technology and via digitalization. And when I've spoken about the employee experience, a fundamental component of it is digitalization, to be able to measure, have certain metrics in place and understand, if you're pulling this lever here, how is it impacting down the line, with respect to your engagement, your retention. All that it's data driven. So we need to move in that direction. We're not there yet, but I'm hoping with certain initiatives that I will put forward in the months and years ahead, that will come to fruition. Yeah.
I'm a big believer in technology and how we can use technology to support us rather than see it as robots are going to replace us.
No, yeah. In our sector, it's impossible. In the hotel sector, eventually it's something you could contemplate in back of house roles, maintenance and stuff like that. But anything to do with the purpose, la raison d'être of being a hotel company, it's fundamentally a human connection, you see, people.
Absolutely. You mentioned, I think, in response to one of the questions about the strategic importance of being a GC. You've been in your role for 3 years now, and then you were already head of legal at Omnicane before. How has these roles honed your leadership skills?
Very key question. I would say that they haven't honed my leadership skills. I would say that they have provided me with experience. What has honed my leadership skills, in my experience, has been to what extent I have ensured continuous education. By that I mean not on the legal side, but on the business and leadership side. Ever since I entered IBL, there was a gentleman who gifted me a business book, and he said to me on that day, he said, I'll give you a book, it's important that you read it, it's important lawyers understand business. And his name is Patrice Robert, he's today the head of operations at IBL, an absolute gentleman. And he came to give me a new copy of the book. It's called From Good to Great by Jim Collins.
I have read that book,
okay.
It's
Fantastic. And he gave me a new copy, gifted me a new copy. And when I got home at night, I was going through and I realized he wrote a lovely little word for me, He inscribed the book. And he wished that this book would help me on my path to greatness. And I was extremely touched by that. It's a moment that has marked me for the rest of my career and probably consolidated my wish to remain in-house counsel and general counsel because of that connection, between business and the lawyer. And that was the start of a learning journey for me to learn what leadership is, because leadership is a skill that you learn. It's like accounting, it's like management. It's not something you can be imbued with, natural talents. Humility is one of them. A great skill, a great attribute of leadership. But it's always been that continuous learning, continuous development of reading. As the saying goes, not all leaders are readers, but all readers are leaders. So I'm not saying that I'm a leader. I strive to be a leader in what I do because I've got a big team with me today. It's a continuous journey, and the experience is one part of it. And I think that the learning and the using the various leadership techniques that I've learned and that I've assimilated during my readings, that's where the value is. Combining what you've learned with the experience that you have, that's what allows you to address novel situations and manage those situations to the best of your ability. It's all about doing your best at the end of the day.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to come back to that gentleman who gave you that book. I remember when I started my in-house, my one and only in-house role, I had a fantastic boss. And to me, she's one of those people who's marked me for life because she was a fantastic mentor. How important do you think it's to have a mentor as you're growing professionally?
It's essential. I don't think that you need a mentor which is in the same field as you. It's probably not advisable, I think, especially as an in-house counsel. I mean, it's easier to navigate if you have someone from the business perspective, but it's absolutely essential. And I think if you can have certain people along your road, I think all of us have had that. You've mentioned one person. I've had several people who have marked my career. Not necessarily as a mentor. I haven't had the opportunity of having a mentor, but I have been a mentor to some other people. But it's all about, seeing the value that people can bring to you, and just taking it with open arms, because like you said, that person marked you for life. It's the same thing for me. That was a defining moment in my career, and a moment which consolidated the fact that I would never look back. I always look forward, and today I consider myself obviously a lawyer by profession, but a person who's full in swing with business, and even more so now, being a CPO, a Chief People Officer. It's very much the core and crux of what we do. Being involved with business, understanding business, and working with finance, working with the operation teams, working with the real estate and construction teams, working with the comms team. Everything is interconnected, and it's important that you understand your role and how that role can bring value, not only to yourself, to your team, but to all the others, because all of those components I've mentioned, when they have problems as well, they come and see you, the head of all those departments. So it's important at the very top you have that trust, you have that respect, so that people can come and see you for anything. It's as I say, a human resource manager, the CPO today, is someone who is multidisciplinary. This person acts as a psychologist, an unofficial lawyer. The list goes on of what they do. So I have a lot of admiration for people within that sector, and today I'm glad to form part of it, of the human resource and people space.
Last question before we wrap up today, Sebastian. If you had a young, aspiring in-house lawyer just about to start their journey, what would be the one single piece of advice that you would give them?
Good question. I think multiple pieces of advice I would be able to give them, but the principal one would be to read on business, to learn on leadership. It is probably the greatest attribute that an in-house counsel, an aspiring in-house counsel, would want, is to have their place at the table, and not just be someone who's in an office behind a screen. You want to have your place at the table. If you want to have your place at the table, you need to read, you need to learn about business, you need to learn about leadership and apply it. That's how you get your place at the table. If you don't do that and you are a pure lawyer, it won't work. You will end up going back to the transactional world or becoming a litigator, because in my experience, and I know exactly what I'm saying, but maybe certain people won't agree with me, but 20% of the job is legal. 80% of being a good in-house counsel is a whole load of other things. It's attitude, it's your learning, your partnering with business, and above all your attitude. Attitude is everything. You can teach skills. You can teach someone how to review a contract, how to sense certain difficulties, in a legal situation, the reflexes of a lawyer. You can teach that, but attitude is a bit more harder to mold, and you develop the right attitude through educating yourself, being humble, and listening to those around you.
And I think, as our previous guest, I will now put it, emotional intelligence.
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
it's a no-brainer.
Absolutely, that's obviously a major. I agree. It goes hand in hand with the leadership leadership style. But emotional intelligence, yeah, you can't be a leader if you do not have those soft skills, and the soft skills are the skills of tomorrow. It comes to the 20% rule that I just mentioned. Those soft skills is what will make you a major success in your career as an in-house counsel. And I know that most who succeed as in-house counsels, I'm sure Ahuna would say the same thing. You have that benefit of working closely with business, having your place at the table amongst the business people, and that is such a fulfilling. It's such a fulfilling moment and such a fulfilling path from there onwards.
Last question, just because you said you're a big reader, what book are you reading at the moment?
Right now I'm reading a book with my team. I went on holiday to Turkey with my wife. Before taking up the position, I needed some time to think and some time to plan, so we went away for a long overdue holiday, just her and I without the kids. And so I went to a book court. I said, I need to get a nice book, a nice leadership book. And I fell upon a book, excuse my language, but it's called No Bullshit Leadership by Chris Hurst.
Okay.
And absolutely phenomenal book. It is very, very down-to-earth leadership. It's put very simply, it's not academic. And it touches on, I would think, probably the most difficult parts of the job of an in-house counsel or any person within the business, which is culture. Culture is something which is intangible, and I think that in chapter 4 of the book he explains the power of culture. I think culture is something which confounds many leaders because they can't see it. You can't see. But culture is essentially the behavior of management. That's basically what it is, and that behavior is based on values of the company, which is very, very, very crude in stating that you can have as many values as you want at the front door of your company. If your culture isn't right and it's not being lived, it won't work. And you got a whole chapter on culture, and that was probably a real eye opener for me. And I'm working on that very book with my team. And a copy to each of them, my people and culture managers, and we're working, chapter by chapter with each other. And I want them to assimilate, these various leadership skills. I shared it with the executive committee as well, because I found it to be an absolute eye opener. It is far more. It's 200 pages, and I recommend it.
It's not very big. I will definitely look it up. Have you read? Sorry, I know I said last question, but I just find that fascinating. Have you read Leadership in Turbulent Times?
No.
On the 4 American presidents.
Leadership by Doris Kearns Goodwin. Yes.
I started reading it during the first lockdown, and I think I read it 3 times.
Yeah,
Fantastic
Roosevelt,
book.
Lyndon Johnson,
Abraham Lincoln. I can't remember the 4th one.
I think it's you had both Roosevelts,
Yes,
Teddy,
correct.
and the other guy,
Yes,
and then Lyndon Johnson and Abe Lincoln. Now, if you haven't read it, it's a first book, Team of Rivals.
Actually, I wanted to buy it. I went through every single book court in Mauritius. They ran out of it. I think I've got to special order it. But yes, it's on my list.
That's one I would recommend to any in-house counsel. Managing a team which has conflictual issues, and there's so much to unpack from that book, so much, and I go back to a lot of points that I read in that book, in certain experiences I've had or that I'm currently living, which are greatly beneficial. Team of Rivals, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln. That's a full title.
He was a genius. He was
absolute genius. Genius due to his humility. He was just someone who was very humble, came from a humble background, and he's
taught himself to read.
Exactly.
Yes.
Blackstone's law. And his whole cabinet were graduates from Harvard and all that, and they didn't believe in him. But I think that certain decisions that he took and his humility just just dumbfounded them. And he's one of his cabinet secretaries. His name is Edwin Stanton. When he passed away, he said that he belongs to the ages. You know, that's a great phrase, because basically he's saying that he's a legend. And these are people who didn't believe in him, you know, when he became president. He was a total outsider. But she's a phenomenal writer, Doris Kearns Goodwin.
I never used to read non-fiction until I started to read her, and now I only read non-fiction. Sebastian, thank you so much. I've had so many insights from our conversation, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the invitation.